Okay. Good morning, everyone. Good morning to our speakers and distinguished guests from the government, the diplomatic community, the think tanks. I am Joyce Ilas. I am the Communications and Advocacy Lead of Strat-based Albert Del Rosario Institute, and I will also be your host and moderator for today. Welcome to the forum on the geopolitics of infrastructure, opportunities, and challenges for the Philippines and the Indo-Pacific. This event is organized by the Strat-based ADRi Institute in partnership with the U.S. Embassy in the Philippines. This is a hybrid event, so thank you very much to everyone who is here with us today in our event venue. And also thank you to everyone who is joining us via Zoom. Gaps in infrastructure present opportunities for cooperation among states while also demonstrating certain challenges in foreign policy. Competition in the infrastructure sector is expected to increase with the USS Build Back Better World and the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. In the case of the Philippines, President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has identified the infrastructure sector as one of his administration's priorities. Capitalizing on his predecessor's infrastructure program and as part of his 8-point socioeconomic agenda, the president launched the Build Better More program with the aim of expanding the country's connectivity through the construction of roads, highways, and airports, among others. In this context, there is a need for the Philippines to capitalize on the rise of regional infrastructure initiatives to address existing gaps and further develop its infrastructure sector while safeguarding itself from potential security risks. Participation in these global infrastructure projects requires proper examination of their risks, benefits, and impact on the current geopolitical dimension of the Indo-Pacific. So without further ado, to deliver today's welcoming remarks, let us all please welcome Professor Victor Andres Dindo Manhit, President of Strat-based ADRi Institute.
Thank you, Joyce. Good morning to everyone. Good morning to our speakers, which will be properly introduced in a while, to our participants, both from the diplomatic community, civil society, academe, and media. We have Zoom participants. We had at least 80 registrations in this. We're experimenting with this hybrid model of webinars to broaden participants, but also to ensure that we have stakeholders as we discuss important issues like how do we collaborate in Philippine infrastructure development. In Strat-based ADRi Institute, we have tried to look at the geopolitical landscape in the Indo-Pacific and review it, number one, through traditional ways, traditional approaches. And but as we have evolved, we've also looked at non-traditional challenges. And for today's forum, we would like to focus on critical infrastructures and vulnerabilities, which we believe poses opportunities to cooperate and compete among states. On one hand, we continue to have this evolving security challenges. And these security issues, traditional, non-traditional, evolving, will affect the stability and peace in the Indo-Pacific region. And over the years, the global political structure has gradually shifted into a multipolar world, wherein states are economically, geopolitically, and strategically interconnected. This phenomenon prompted major powers to increase their engagements with one another through partnerships and different modes of cooperation. There's a recognition that unilateral, bilateral, and multilateral cooperation with like-minded counterparts, nation states, countries that share values in this rules-based international order, can usher in prosperity and development for all. One of the areas in which we have seen a steady growth of cooperation is the infrastructure space. Even during the middle of the pandemic, we saw how the G7, I think June of 2021, the G7 countries launched its Build Back Better World program to address the growing infrastructure divide among countries, particularly the discrepancy of the state of infrastructure between their developed and less developed partners. The program, with a funding of $40 trillion, intends to bridge the infrastructure divide through values-driven, high-standard, and transparent infrastructure partnership. Just the past year or two, we have seen the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity, another key initiative. And the Philippines is one of the initial partners of this Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. Our own president has expressed his support for the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework and guaranteed the country's involvement in the framework to expand its economic and trade activities. During the visit of the president in the US, of course, because of the UN General Assembly, we saw how our own DTI Secretary Alfredo Pascual met with US Commerce Secretary Gina Raimundo, where they agreed to pursue key investments in power generation, mineral processing, and infrastructure in the Philippines. In the first State of the Nation address of our president, if you would remember that third Monday of July last year, he identified infrastructure sector as a priority of his administration. President Marcos Jr. has described the country's infrastructure as the backbone of the economy. As such, he has capitalized on his predecessor's flagship infrastructure program with the launch of Build Better More program, or BBM program, with the aim of maintaining the momentum and further expanding the project to build better more. And these recent foreign trips, we've seen how infrastructure development partnership has been key to the narrative post-visit of our own president. The priority attributed to building the nation's infrastructure network can be seen through his various international visits and engagement, where he advocates for the pursuit of bilateral and multilateral infrastructure development partnership. Just at the start of this year, in one of my commentaries in the Philippine Daily Inquirer, I spoke of we need to have policies founded on national interests and fortified by alliances. And I want to go beyond what I wrote in the Philippine Daily Inquirer, that on the national level, the current administration advocates for public-private partnerships in the financing and construction of infrastructure projects. As it continues to engage in infrastructure development projects, the administration of President Marcos Jr. must ensure that it remains guided by the Philippines' independent foreign policy and national interests. It must continue to explore both bilateral and multilateral infrastructure development partnership and engage in public-private partnership to maximize potential gains for the Filipino nation. More importantly, the current administration must ensure that it safeguards the Philippines from potential economic, financial, and security risk. I refer back to what I was sharing earlier, the non-traditional security risk that may arise from this partnership by ensuring that appropriate studies are conducted on the feasibility and sustainability of projects that it engages in. Amidst the current geopolitical landscape and as we transition to a path of post-pandemic recovery, the current administration must increase its effort in building and modernizing our infrastructure networks while further improving the ease of doing business and creating a more enabling regulatory development for both local and foreign investors to take part in Philippine infrastructure development. Sorry for taking much of your time, but I wanted to put the context why our institute continues to organize this type of events, bring stakeholders, because together we can really build better more, according to this administration. Thank you and good morning to all.
All right, thank you very much, Sir Dindo. We have a lot that we will be discussing today. But before we proceed to our first speaker, to our attendees here in our venue, you will have a chance to ask questions to our guests during the open forum later. But for to our Zoom participants, should you have any questions for our speakers, please feel free to send them in the Q&A box below in your screen. We will also try our best to answer or to take them up later during the open forum. Okay, and moving forward, we are very honored to have with us today USEC Mark Steven C. Pastor, Undersecretary for Road Transport and Infrastructure of the Department of Transportation. He will be sharing with us his insights on intergovernmental partnerships, risks, and opportunities. Ladies and gentlemen, USEC Mark Steven Pastor.
Thank you, ma'am. Strat-based ADR Institute President, Mr. Dindo Manhit, Mr. RP Manhit, Lloyd Zaragoza, ladies and gentlemen, fellow presenters and attendees, magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. Imbag na bigat kada kayo amin o dahil Ilocano to'y. Good morning, everyone. I am Mark Steven Pastor from the Department of Transportation, Undersecretary for Road Transport and Infrastructure. Allow me to present the intergovernmental partnerships, risks, and the opportunities for the road-based public transport sector. Before I proceed with the actual presentation, allow me to present the outline of the same, starting from the challenges in road-based public transportation in the Philippines, the Marcos administration 8-point Socioeconomic Agenda with a focus on transportation, and the Build Better More, as mentioned also by Professor Manhit, the transformation of the road-based public transportation system, the projects of the department insofar as the road transport is concerned, and finally, the risks and opportunities on intergovernmental partnerships. Based on the 2018 JICA study, 3.5 billion pesos in economic value is lost due to traffic. This amount is expected to triple in number by the year 2030 if traffic in Metro Manila is not arrested. The key contributors to this are fragmented public transport operations, poor quality of road network, poor intermodal integration, congestion and pollution, high volume of private cars over public utility vehicles, lack of quality urban transport systems, limited investment in transport infrastructure, and obviously road safety issues. In the road safety matter, 620 billion pesos is the estimated cost of road crash traffic fatalities and injuries as a percentage to the gross domestic product of the Philippines. When President Marcos assumed the presidency in 2022, he presented his 8-point socioeconomic agenda, one of which is improved transportation. The General Appropriations Act of 2023 laid down the spending priorities of the administration in the near term, directed toward addressing inflation and mitigating the socio-economic scarring brought by the COVID-19 pandemic. Building on his predecessor's Build program, President Marcos' Build Better More aims to expand the infrastructure modernization initiatives introduced under the BBB program. In order to attain this, the administration has allocated 976 billion for the Build Better More program, with the Department of Transportation receiving a total share of 82.3 billion pesos. This ambitious program, per the Department of Budget and Management, targets infrastructure spending to reach 5 to 6% of the GDP annually, in line with the administration's medium-term fiscal framework. In order to attain the level of improvement set by this administration in the 8-point socioeconomic agenda, we see transforming the public transportation system as a whole. I'd like to emphasize as a whole, as the precursor for the success of all other initiatives of the road sector, including its various infrastructure projects. The Public Utility Vehicle Modernization Program, or PUVMP, remains as the most critical program of the government in terms of holistically transforming the road transportation system. The program does not only address the current state of our public transportation, which is really fragmented, but also other components such as route network efficiency, vehicle standards, fleet management, uplifting the living conditions of our transport stakeholders, and most importantly, ensuring that commuters get to their destinations safely, quickly, and conveniently. At the height of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, the department likewise introduced the service contracting program, which is the end goal of enhancing the efficiency and quality of public transportation. You might be aware of the Libreng Sakay or the free rides initiated by the Department of Transportation. The said Libreng Sakay or free ride is a component of the service contracting program. The government pays for the daily operational expenses of the operators, so that as to ensure that public transportation is available at any given time, especially during that time that the sitting capacity was reduced so as to address the physical distancing between and among passengers in a public utility vehicle. The program complements the implementation of the PUVMP by ensuring that public transportation operations adhere to the set service standards of the government while assuring its viability. Another complementary program is the low-carbon urban transport system. Through the passage of the Electric Vehicle Industry Development Act, or EVIDA, the government intends to increase the demand generation for electric vehicles and to compel the 5% mandatory share of the vehicle fleet in public transportation, as well as in the private sector as well, and integrate green routes into the current public transport route plans. Aside from this, there is also a proposed incentive for electric vehicles. This is to ensure the readiness of green routes, electric vehicle charging stations, and other support programs of the local government unit, among others. The United Nations Development Program, or UNDP, will be providing low-value grants to support the electric vehicle initiatives in the country. In addition to electric vehicles, the department also will release for publication a department order that will further enhance and promote electric vehicles so that we can see proliferation of the same within the next couple of years. We are providing certain incentives or even leeway for the electric vehicles to run its route so as to promote the increase in numbers. As we aim for the holistic transformation of the country's public transportation system, we also see the opportune time to rethink our infrastructure landscape, including the transformation of the busiest thoroughfare in the country, known as EDSA. The EDSA Busway project, similarly introduced during the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, is significantly changing the travel time for commuters traversing EDSA. It is a dedicated median lane for city buses which has reduced travel time between Monumento and Pasay from 2 to 3 hours to just an hour and 30 minutes. This is reflected in the average ridership as well in EDSA, peaking at 380,000 per day. During the last week of Libreng Sakay in December, we have also peaked with an average of 404,000 passengers per day. With funding provisions from the government, the EDSA busway is expected to cater to more passengers with various improvement plans that are now underway and targeted for completion in 2026. These plans are supported by a feasibility study conducted by SWECO, funded by Swedfund, Sweden's development financing institution. Aside from this, the government also, through a partnership with the PPP Center, is undertaking for a feasibility study to determine the feasibility and for which components will provide the best services with the EDSA busway through a PPP partnership. Next slide, please. Aside from improving mass transit along EDSA, the department is also putting a highlight on active mobility. With the EDSA Greenways project, pedestrian networks to the identified train stations along EDSA will be connected to major destinations and transport hubs. This will not only provide safe walking spaces for commuters, but also see Metro Manila as a walkable city to around 1.1 million pedestrians daily upon its completion in the second quarter of 2025. For the first phase of the EDSA Greenways, there will be 4 stations connecting to our rail lines. This will be in Balintawak, Cubao, Guadalupe, and Taft Avenue. Another Greenways project is the Makati BGC Greenways. It aims to develop pedestrian networks to connect Makati to BGC through covered elevated walkways with bike lanes. The first phase of which will run from MRT3 Buendia Station to the BGC bus depot. Currently, there are certain issues on the project acceptance which are being resolved by the DOTR and the BCDA in coordination with the pertinent local government unit. Aside from the promotion of mass transit, one of the DOTR's priority projects is active transportation, as mentioned, which is in accordance with the National Transport Policy issued by NEDA in 2017. From the project's inception in 2020, a total of 564 kilometers of bike lanes have been established in different metropolitan areas in the Philippines, namely Metro Manila, Metro Cebu, and Metro Davao. The growing demand for active transport has shown that a 1-to-5 car-to-bike ratio effectively moves more people per length per time, as well as the reduction in travel cost. A total of 470 kilometers of bike lanes will be established under our 2022 appropriations, which is now under procurement, while an additional 150-kilometer bike lanes will be established for this year's GAA. Given the need not only to transform the public transport operations in Manila, but also in other provinces and cities, the Department of Transportation's road sector is implementing projects to modernize other highly urbanized cities, including the cities of Cebu and Davao. The Cebu Bus Rapid Transit, or CBRT, which is set for groundbreaking on the 27th this coming week, is a 13.18-kilometer bus rapid transit lane traversing from South Road properties through Mambaling up to the IT Park with 17 bus stations, 2 terminals, and 1 depot. It can accommodate 160,000 passenger capacity once fully operational in the second quarter of 2025. The total project cost is 16.3 billion and 6.6 billion under the GOP component for the right-of-way acquisition. The next project, and we are very proud of this, is the Davao Public Transport Modernization Project, or more commonly known as the High Priority Bus System. The DPTMP is a landmark public transit development project that seeks to deliver an intelligent and integrated bus network capable of moving 800,000 passengers daily, ensuring mobility and accessibility for the Davao City's growing population and economy. The transition of 9,000 jeepneys to 1,000 high-capacity vehicles, including 18-meter articulated battery electric buses. For the 1,000 buses, 386 of those will be electric vehicles. Total funding for the project is 73.92 billion and slated for completion in 2025. This is more of a showcase actually. Once we have implemented this in the city of Davao, it can be replicated in other areas nationwide in partnership with local government units. Obviously, funding is an issue, but we believe that the local government units, the highly urbanized cities can also fund this in partnership with the national government. Building on the success of the Parañaque Integrated Terminal Exchange, or PITX, the first land port in the country, and to further address concerns on intermodal integration of public transport, the DOTR continues to establish integrated terminals in Metro Manila and other provinces in the country. One of which is the Taguig City Integrated Terminal Exchange, or the TCITX. It is an integrated and multimodal terminal that provides convenient connection options to passengers. It will serve as a transfer point between provincial buses coming from the south and multiple modes of intercity transports such as buses, the subway system, the PNR, UV Express, jeeps, and taxis as well. The ITX model aims to reduce traffic congestion by limiting the entrance of provincial buses in Metro Manila's major thoroughfares, like EDSA. Upon completion, the TCITX can accommodate 160,000 passengers per day. Further, the two intermodal terminals are set to be established in Ilocos Norte and in El Nido, Palawan. The Ilocos Norte Transport Hub and Parking Building is envisioned to be an intermodal terminal that will have multi-level platforms, which aim to lessen traffic congestion by providing seamless interconnectivity of the different modes of transportation and serve as a transfer point for the commuting public going in and out of the province of Ilocos Norte. The target completion for the project is fourth quarter of this year. While the El Nido Transport Terminal, the project aims to establish a systematic off-street terminal packed with complete facilities such as a parking slots, arrival bays, internet connection, restrooms, retiring rooms, and a food court. The target completion for the project is first quarter of 2024. Although this was updated, it might be in the third quarter of 2024 as we have yet to receive funding from DBM. Now, for the risks of intergovernmental partnerships. The DOTR has been keen on partnerships that it undertakes leading to successful and long-term relationships with various international entities and governments. With the huge investments in the infrastructure, especially under the Build Better More program, more investors from various countries have participated in our projects. The department has a long-term relationship with multilateral banks such as the Japan International Cooperation Agency, or JICA, the Asian Development Bank, or ADB, the World Bank, the Export-Import Bank of Korea, or KEXIM, and the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, or AIIB, among others. The Philippine government also has a robust project evaluation metrics that filter non-viable projects. With these partnerships, the risks that the government usually encounter include the following: delay in the implementation of the project due to various internal processes and requirements in the Philippines. There is also a strong need to tailor fit the solutions to adapt to the Philippines market and environment. Lack of standards causing delay and longer timeline on development of projects. And finally, the changes in policy direction every time a new administration comes in. For the opportunities, the department has embarked on several pilot projects to address the wide gap in public transportation. These projects are based on international benchmarks which pose a huge opportunity in scalability and replicability. The earlier mentioned department order with regard to electric vehicles is one of them. We intend to remove the red tapes, so to speak, that are in place in government, so that those who want to participate in our electric vehicles public transportation can have the leeway to implement the same. We will also implement it in pilot cities that are looking forward to cooperate with the national government in terms of expanding the coverage of road-based transportation under the electric vehicles without being restricted by the route-based public transportation that has been in place for the longest time. The PUVMP program also is targeted to deploy at least 110,000 new modernized jeeps, which are approximately $6 billion, which approximately is a $6 billion market. On top of this is the current pipeline of road-based projects valued at $2.1 billion. The Philippine market poses a huge opportunity in providing scholars with several case studies on technology-driven solutions, gender and social interventions, and also health benefits. At present, these infrastructure projects have to hurdle a 10% economic investment rate of return, compared to the 9% hurdle rate from other countries. To also attract foreign direct investments, the government has passed the Public Service Act that allows foreign ownership of critical transportation infrastructures. Relative to this government is committed in developing more projects and even replicating this in other parts of the country. As I end my presentation, allow me to thank the Strat-based ADR Institute for this invitation to speak on the current initiatives for improving the Philippines public transportation system, focusing solely on road-based transportation, as well as the risk and opportunities on intergovernmental partnerships. Relative to the same, we hope to encourage collaborative partnerships with different government levels, both locally and internationally, and even partnerships with the private sector. Again, on behalf of Secretary Bautista, we would like to thank you. Magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you very much, Yusek Mark Steven Pastor. Very interesting presentation, especially because we were just discussing this earlier. Traffic is a big concern for many of us, especially now that many of us are being asked to return to work in our offices, and also face-to-face events are now much more common. 3.5 billion pesos lost to traffic every day is really significant, but not to mention, of course, the time lost that we could have spent with families, longer time to sleep. That's very significant as well. So I'm sure many of you have questions that you'd want to ask Yusek Mark later. You can ask that later during the open forum, also for our online participants via Zoom. So moving forward to our next speaker, to give us further perspective on the point of view of the private sector, we have with us today Mr. Coco Alcuaz, Executive Director of the Makati Business Club. Mr. Alcuaz will share his insights on advancing infrastructure connectivity through public-private partnerships. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Coco Alcuaz.
Morning, everybody. Can you see the works? Where will I point the clicker? So this is so first of all, thank you very much. Oh, sorry. Thanks. Good morning, and thank you very much. Thanks to Stratbase for this invitation, and thanks everyone for coming this morning. Thank you for inviting MBC to participate in this very important and very interesting roundtable. Whenever Dindo and his team ask me if MBC can participate in these things, I always ask, are you sure you mean me or do you mean one of my principals? One of my principals is Cosette. I think she's late, but she's on our board, and that's usually who you'd listen to. But when they tell me it's me, I always tell them, can you please tell me who the other speakers are? Because I want to be sure that I'm not too far out of my depth or they're too far out of my league. Of course, Yusek Pastor is here, so definitely they're out of my league. But I also know they're very kind, and I hope you're very kind as well when I share my comments today. So the talk I was asked to give was on connectivity, and I'm very glad for this topic. And I'd like to start with a video, if it's okay. Let's see if this works. No audio? Could you try the audio, please? Okay, we'll try to see if that works a bit later on. This is a video that was shown in 1986. Wait, go back. Here, try this one. Can you try this? Will it work or not? Huh? Sorry? Okay, now let's just go to the next slide then. That's a video that was shown in 1986. The tagline there, don't make me sing it, okay, is the beauty of the Philippines shining through. It was released just after the EDSA Revolution 86, so there's lots of euphoria, lots of good feelings at that moment. The point I wanted to make with that, again, is not to sing the song, which hopefully will play for you later on, is that at that time in 1986, our main, let's see if this works. Wala pa rin? Okay, never mind. Let's just go to the next slide. Our main international airport at that point was what we now know as Terminal 1. And it's still our main international airport. That's, I think, the point I wanted to make. But the point of the song is the beauty of the Philippines shining through. But my addition to that, it's very hard to get to. If you saw the scenes in that video, you have all these beautiful beaches and the like. I have no idea how people get to them then. They're a bit easier to get to now, but still I think we're in the same situation that we're in. So I'm very glad for this discussion. Like I said, we're supposed to talk about transport. And if we go to this next slide. I'm very glad for this topic, and I asked Stratbase, Christina, thank you very much, what they meant by connectivity. And she said, connected, convenient, and congestion-free. Ease of travel, ease of doing business, and then she gave several examples, and the first example she gave, of course, happened to be NAIA, which is very fitting. Next slide. Most transport, USEC, obviously you know this is your area, most transport, most PPPs happen to be, most infra and most PPPs happen to be in the transport sector. So that's one reason to talk about them. The other reason to talk about them really is they're very important. And they're very important, I think, for at least 4 reasons. First is tourism. I think we all don't want to be reminded of how few visitors come to the Philippines compared to our neighbors, including much smaller neighbors than us. The next is ease of doing business, as was mentioned earlier, making sure that from the factory and from the warehouse, you're able to take the goods to the consumers. If you're going to export them, There's a way to do that, and if you import them, there's also a way to do that. In this time of viruses and virality and variants, I have an EODB variant, which I'm going to call next. The ease of getting food on the table. And could you click one more? Click. And controlling inflation. There are many reasons why food is very expensive in the Philippines. We have shortages, we have scarcity and high prices. There's many reasons for that. Many of them out of our control. Some of them we shoot ourselves in the foot. I think we know those reasons already. But some of them should be under our control. And I'm old enough to know that I've heard for decades that the big problem is the transport from the farm to the cities or the consumers, to make it easy for those farmers to bring it to the city and the consumers, or for companies to buy it and bring it forward. Instead, we rely a lot on middlemen. Middlemen is not a bad word. They're just fulfilling a role that the government has abdicated, and as we will discuss, that the private sector is very willing to help in. The last topic, I think, is the one that's closest to the gut. It's commuters. It's all well and good if we can get the tourists here in the Philippines, but for once a year, every couple of years. But every day, if you go to the next slide, every day we see a scene like this. And I don't know if there's anyone here from ADB. ADB, anyone? That's the ADB building behind it. Very, very active in the transport sector in the Philippines, and yet this is right outside the ADB building. This is in October. It's not any special day in October of 2022. That's a typical day. There may have been an accident that day or a breakdown, but that happens quite often. If you're not taking the train, you could be taking, next slide, the bus. And this is Commonwealth Avenue. It could be a sunny day, a rainy day, or any given day. That's what you have to contend with. And I frankly consider this a sin, that every day we subject most of our countrymen to this kind of infrastructure. Next slide. The good news is that this administration believes in PPPs, and for these reasons, they know that they need the help. There's a lot of debt, a lot of COVID debt they have to pay, a lot of services they have to do, and if the private sector is willing to take part of its share, they're very willing to share that. They say that, and they're projecting that to the world. There's some criticism of how often the president travels abroad. I think Dindo's been in some of those trips, and maybe some of you. No, I'm not complaining about Dindo traveling. But the reception that we gather that the president gets is that he's projecting well for the Philippines. I mean, there's he comes into the room, and we hear from the foreign side that he's received very well. He looks very professional. He acts very professionally. I've even heard the word used that he looks very presidential. Whatever many of us or many people might think about the name that he carries, if you take it for what it is, he's projecting that a good image of the Philippines. It projects to potential investors that this is a place that they can possibly do business in. Next slide. I'm going to talk about the problems and the turnoffs that infrastructure and PPPs have, and parts of it come from these two reports that we did last year, and we presented to the government at the end of last year. If you want to see a copy, it's over there, or you go to our website. We did two reports. We talked to about, I think, 200 companies and asked them for their feedback. Companies in the infrastructure field, we asked them for their feedback for the kinds of problems and the kind of action points that they would offer. Next slide. So here are the problems and turnoffs. First one is very year after year, decade after decade, increases are blocked, refunds are blocked, arbitration happens. Even when you get a positive ruling on your arbitration, that can be blocked as well. So if you were an investor, why would you invest in these projects? Next slide. Aside from that, there's this constant back and forth where one administration approves projects and the next administration holds. You have that with President Arroyo and ADRi. You have that with, next, President Aquino and SCTEX. And you have that with the the overachiever when it comes to this item. Next. President Duterte. 5 airport PPPs and BRTs were approved by President Aquino. Those were all canceled. And about 5 or 6 of major business groups got together to propose a rehab of NAIA. And while they were given original proponent status, that died a slow death. These 5 airport PPP projects, if you look at your newspapers in the last few days, those are now in the list of the DOTR among the airports that they want to bid out 6 years later. One of the BRT projects is the EDSA BRT that the USEC talked about. That was also there 6 years ago, and now it's being revived again for possible privatization. The NAIA Consortium project, that died a slow death and was given to another business group. That is the Megawide group that built and ran the wonderful terminal in Cebu. However, that group is now out of the airport business, thanks in part to Cosette, who's not here, when Aboitiz Infra Capital bought the Cebu airport. So I'm not sure where that is now. Maybe, I'm not sure if USEC knows the answer to that question. President Duterte, also not direct transport related, was very clear that his administration was not in favor of PPPs. They wanted ODA funded and General Appropriations Act or budget funded projects. Maybe okay during that time when there was a lot more money than there is now. We all know of the attack he made on the NCR water concessionaires, forcing one of them to do a sale. And finally, in the 11th hour of their administration, in March or April of last year, they revised the BOT IRR to make it essentially unattractive for companies to invest in BOTs, essentially codifying their stance against PPPs. They changed the IRR to make it unattractive to do that. These are the headline grabbing problems and turnoffs. Next slide. There are some that are not so headline grabbing, and some of these came out in those 2 reports that we talked about when we talked to companies in this sector. Click. First, the lack of a pipeline and lack of a capacity. When the Aquino administration came in, because the Arroyo administration wasn't doing much in this area, they found that there were no projects lined up, and even the departments had a weak capacity to design and execute these kinds of projects. Not very clear to me what the situation is now after the Duterte government, but there seem to be projects that seem to be coming up, so that's good. When the Aquino administration came in 2010, I was a reporter at that time. There's lots of bravado about we're gonna bid out dozens. I remember the number 80 PPP projects by the end of the administration. I believe they did 12. A lot of that bravado was in the first year. I don't know if Cosette's going to arrive. Cosette is absolved of that because she took over the PPP Center in October of 2011, more than a year later. I think by that time the bravado was gone, and Cosette focused on executing those 12. Next. We got from a lot of the infra companies and construction companies that we talked to that there's a lot of duplication or sometimes conflict between the requirements of the national government and the local government in terms of requirements, documentary and otherwise, and that causes a lot of delay and even errors that cost them a lot of money. Next. Not too surprising, the right-of-way issue. So many projects delayed by this. This was not a surprising one and a very popular suggestion by many of the participants. Next. This one, not too surprising, but I think the details are surprising. This one includes both PPPs and non-PPPs. And what I think surprised us most was that even projects that had ODA funding, even the release of those payments could be delayed for reasons that have to do with Congress passing the budget or including it in the budget and authorizing the release. So that is a bit surprising to us. Last. And finally, I really want to stress this. I think while there are many transport PPPs, if I am not mistaken rather, they are overweight in terms of roads and underweight in terms of public transport. When strat-based talks about convenience in connectivity, they really mean that the transport is there and affordable. I think the statistics say that more than 90% don't have a car. So if you build a road, only 10% can use it readily, and then the rest have to rely on a bus system that either works or doesn't work. It's great that there's a move, Yusek Pastor, towards service contracting. I think there's still kinks in that, and maybe we'll discuss it later, but that's a good move in the right direction. That and trains, of course. Next slide. So I'm going to end with the action points. First, fix the BOT IRR. We were so surprised when the government came in that they said they were going to fix those last-minute changes that the Duterte administration did. And we said, okay, it's going to take them a year to do that. They did it in about 3 months, and that was a great quick action that everyone celebrated. Next. The other one is to put up a reopen for business sign on the Philippines, and the president and the government is doing that. And so we'll not count those, and I have several more points here. So first, just depoliticize rate increases and stop blocking increases and awards of arbitration awards, and make a statement in that tone. Tell the world that we know this was happening in the past, it's not going to happen this time, so that they're held accountable for that promise. I think a statement like that would go some way towards turning the perception of the Philippines towards the better. Next. Like I said, turn that around. Turn around the public transporting and overweight public transport, trains and buses over roads. 3. Speed up those payments. There are talks about how to do that, and I think there's more details that I think might be too boring for this discussion. But there's a lot of legislative mechanisms there that are involved. But that's certainly on the table of the government right now, and we're very supportive of any change they make in that area. Number 4, amend the Right of Way Act, which is RA 9184. The proposal is that even before the groundbreaking starts, the government can start buying right of way. That's not necessarily allowed at this point, but there can be some changes made so that by the time they break ground, they're more sure that all the right of way will be lined up when they need it, when they need to pour cement. Number 5, a lot of the comment also as well was lack of capacity. We've talked about the lack of capacity early on in the national government. Now I think the bigger concern is in the local government, especially because there's a move, and I think Yusek referred to this, for provincial PPPs. And we need to build that capacity. I checked with the PPP Center, and they are going around teaching certain LGUs how to do PPP. So that's very important. Number 2 is a streamline. The next part of that is streamlining the requirements between NG and LGU. And the last item is really pass the PPP Rationalization Act. There's several bills in the House and in the Senate. This is the main bill in the Senate. It encapsulates some of these items, but also more. That will go a long way to taking the experience of the last 40 years or the last 10 years to really codifying a much more streamlined PPP regime. So I'm going to end by just saying, I started by talking about, I'm sorry you didn't hear the song. You can Google it later. Philippine Airlines Shining Through, and saying that while the beauty of the Philippines shines through, it's hard to get to. I'll end by saying we should do all our best, and maybe those action points are a way to get there, to make the Philippines not just easy to get to, but easy to get around. Thank you very much.
All All right, thank you very much, Mr. Coco Alcoaz. Definitely a lot of work still needs to be done to address quite a lot of problems and turn-offs that he enumerated earlier. We still have a long way to go, but I think our next speaker will be able to help provide some immediate solution, at least, to our problems. So our next speaker is Ms. Cosette V. Canilao, President and CEO of Aboitiz Infra Capital, and also former Executive Director of the Public-Private Partnership Center. She will be sharing her insights on how we can bridge the infrastructure gap in the Philippines. Ms. Cosette Canilao will be joining us via Zoom.
Hi, good morning,
Ladies and
everyone.
gentlemen, Ms. Cosette Canilao.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Hold on.
Okay, Ms. Cosette, you can start your presentation now.
Thank you so much.
Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can. Can you hear me?
Or I think we can't hear her.
I think you can't hear me. Hello? Hello?
Ms. Cosette, can you hear us?
Yes. Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. I think we're just having difficulty hearing you. Ms. Cosette, can you try speaking again?
Hi, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay.
Okay, can we do another audio test with Ms. Cosette?
Hello, good morning, everyone. No.
I can hear her from there, but not through the speakers.
Okay.
Okay. So Ms. Cosette, we're just trying to connect the laptop that we're using in the presentation to the speakers here. One last try. Miss Cassette, can we do another audio test?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me now.
Yes, yes, definitely. Okay, you can now start your presentation. Thank you.
All right, thanks. So very good synopsis and the presentation by Coco. He presented everything that's that's wrong, I suppose, and lacking in our current policies and regulations and even practices. So I will part of when I was still with the the PVP Center. This is some sort of the same presentation that I would do to everyone. So we can go to the next slide, please. As we all know, infrastructure is essential to accelerate economic growth and improve the quality of lives in many countries, especially here in the country, right? And high quality infrastructure provides a positive impact to a nation as it promotes productivity, inclusive growth, and improved trade and connectivity. For instance, here in the country, the billions of losses due to road and now air congestions could have been avoided if critical transport infrastructure were in place. Our government's operations can become more transparent and efficient with better ICT infrastructure now that we're moving towards digital economy. On the other hand, infrastructure that is climate resilient can also help the country withstand the consequences of both natural and man-made disasters. So, given the many numerous benefits that that successfully completed infra projects bring, the ideal scenario is to have as many infrastructure projects ongoing whenever possible and wherever these may be needed. However, the stark reality is that government's financial as well as manpower resources and capability are limited on top of the many other demands that come into play. So persistent underfunding of critical infrastructure is hampering economic progress and exposing businesses and communities to significant risks. So that's the value of that PPPs can bring. Yes, so here in the Philippines, there's been a lag in progress in the last decade when it comes to infrastructure development. And with our growing economy, the country requires more and better infrastructure projects. According to NEDA, the government plans to implement 3,600 infrastructure projects by 2028. So the good news is this government is open to collaborate with the private sector in fulfilling these development projects. The questions that comes to fore are how and how fast and effective. So if you go to the next slide, private sector participation in infrastructure projects provide a number of benefits such as increased financial capability, availability of technology, experts and managerial competence, and improved service efficiency if PPP contracts are done right. PPPs provide the best value for money to achieve an optimal combination of cost, quality, and sustainability to meet the needs of the public. However, private sectors have to deal with many challenges and difficulties when doing PPPs, primarily predictability, consistency, and transparency of rules and regulations, pretty much what Coco mentioned a while ago. PPP investors, we look for projects that are bankable, where risks are fairly allocated between the government and us. And we prefer investing in a market where there is deep commitment by the government to undertake an effective PPP program. Unfortunately, those are oftentimes overlooked and underestimated by governments that want to pursue ambitious PPP initiatives. Also, bankability for a developing country such as ours involves more than de-risking the projects. It also entails de-risking the country and the PPP program. So how do we bridge this gap so it doesn't change? First, we need to create, the government needs to create an enabling environment. All levels of government should work together to foster an atmosphere conducive to infrastructure investment. Aligned with the consistent policies on ease of doing business and incentives are essential, but so are frameworks for predictable PPP policies and transparent processes from project evaluation to approval to bidding. The amended IRR of the BOT law is a good start, but operationalizing the new provisions could be a challenge and should be met with a large dose of pragmatism, which the private sector can actually provide feedback to the government. What we are hoping for next is the speedy evaluation and approval of numerous projects in the pipeline. It will also augur well for the private sector if there's clear and consistent communication of directions and timelines as when projects are expected to be evaluated or approved. Second, having a clear pipeline of development projects. Currently, the infrastructure efforts of the government are kind of reactive responses to existing problems to society. A longer-term, proactive, and well-thought infrastructure strategy is essential to maximize the capabilities of the private institutions. A clear and real project pipeline can help the private sector to better prepare for solicited bids and unsolicited proposal, which is allowed under the PPP, the BOT law, and hopefully in the new PPP Act. Additionally, this emphasizes the government's dedication to pursuing a PPP program over the long term, which is a selling point to investors. I guess that's the end of my presentation, and we're actually looking forward to the amendment of the BOT law, which could hopefully, clarify and bring the law to current business environment and current realities. The other plus that the Philippines has right now is that the private sector has already been capacitated on PPPs. They know PPPs very well. They know the requirements of the government, and we are now awaiting for the government to give us clear directions and to engage us, to communicate with us what they want from us and what we want from them. Hopefully, a more rigorous and robust discussion and dialogue between the government and the private sector continues. That's the end for me. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Ms. Cassette. Please stay online on Zoom so you can join us later in our open forum. And again, we apologize to Ms. Cassette and to our online and in-person participants for the technical difficulties. Okay, so our last speaker will talk about transparency and public participation in infrastructure development. Attorney Terry Ridon, a lawyer and former congressman, is the convener of InfraWatch Philippines, a public policy think tank focused on resolving infrastructure under development, power, transport, telecoms, digital, housing, water, and natural resources sector. He also served as the chair and chief executive officer of the Presidential Commission for the Urban Poor. Ladies and gentlemen, Attorney Terry Ridon. I think he stepped outside for a bit. Is he here? Okay. All right, while we're waiting for Attorney Terry, he stepped out? Okay. So while waiting for Attorney, oh, there he is. Okay. So for everyone who is with us again via Zoom, you may send your questions in our Q&A box located below on the lower part of your screen. Okay, again, ladies and gentlemen, Attorney Terry Ridon.
Good morning, everyone. Our thanks to StratBase and to its president, Professor Dindo Manhit, for speak before all of you. Transparency and public participation are two important development concepts which every government has been seeking to mainstream in the course of its work in infrastructure. These are two concepts. These two concepts are also areas which several governments have difficulty trying to implement for various reasons. In the course of this discussion, we will try to discuss what to do and what not to do. But mainly, we will discuss the case of the Maharlika Investment Fund, in which public participation was key in keeping government honest, ensuring that government initiatives truly advance the public interest. The initial concept of the Maharlika Investment Fund was this. It was originally called the Maharlika Wealth Fund, based on the concept of sovereign funds in various countries, particularly natural resources-rich countries in Europe, the Middle East, and international finance centers such as Singapore and Hong Kong. Its initial objectives included funding big-ticket infrastructure projects such as the national grid and various dams around the country. But this proposal came out of left field. This was never a campaign promise. This was never part of any high-level discussions between the executive and the legislature. Some are speculating that this was born out of the president's visit to Singapore while watching the Singapore Grand Prix. What MIF proponents failed to mention was this: sovereign wealth funds can only be viable if funded through the wealth generated by natural resources such as oil, natural gas, and mining. This is the case in Norway, in Russia, and in the Middle East. But the Philippines has no oil, we have limited natural gas, and the current revenue sharing framework on mining does not favor government. SWF around the world can also be funded through surplus government funds, foreign currency deposits, among other government financial instruments. This has been the case in international finance centers such as Singapore and Hong Kong. But we have no surplus government funds, and we're currently on a balance of payment deficit. But what certainly sealed the fate of the MIF as originally proposed was the inclusion of government and private pension funds as major funding sources for the Philippine Sovereign Wealth Fund. And as soon as news broke that pension funds were a major funding source, there was swift opposition from major sectors of society. Leading business groups opposed it. One business group which initially supported it rescinded its support. Workers and employees groups opposed it. Economic experts opposed it. Essentially, the new Marcos administration experienced its first and worst crisis only 5 months into power. And this level of pushback was not without basis. The MIF should not have included pension funds, as these funds are being held in trust for the benefit of its members and not for the benefit of government. These funds have specific investment objectives, timelines, and risk tolerances which may be incompatible to the objectives of the Philippine Sovereign Wealth Fund. As an example, Singapore's Sovereign Wealth Fund, Temasek, has written off $275 million of its investment to the bankrupt crypto firm FTX. And the question to government is this: if a future Philippine Sovereign Wealth Fund makes a similar mistake as Temasek on government and private pension funds, will government be able to foot the bill and make pensioners whole? Probably not. And there is no doubt that SWFs around the world were able to finance the development of their respective countries. Qatar has been able to stage the World Cup, and Norway has been able to sustain its welfare state on the backs of their respective sovereign wealth funds. But instituting our own SWF without a sustainable source of funding, such as oil, gas, natural resources wealth, or significant foreign currency reserves, is putting the cart before the horse. Relying mainly on pension funds and government banks, which already have their own investment objectives, timelines, and risk tolerances subjects the pensions of ordinary families to extraordinary risk. Retirees and depositors did not sign up to subject their money to this new type of risk. And most certainly, a Philippine SWF will undertake riskier bets than what is currently being undertaken by our pension funds and GFIs today. Because a more conservative or more moderate investment strategy is already being undertaken by pension funds and GFIs now. In other words, there is no point undertaking a moderate investment strategy under a new SWF if that is already being undertaken by pension funds and GFIs today. And as such, this would have subjected retirement funds of government and private employees to significant risk. But ultimately, government took a step back from its original proposal. It removed pension funds as funding sources and sought to institute greater transparency, accountability, and professionalism in a future Maharlika investment fund. As now proposed, and because of public pushback, its leadership structure will now be composed of independent finance professionals. We're also urging the Senate to implement a compensation structure based on fund performance. This ensures that the fund is free from political interference and fund performance, the most important bottom line. But looking back, there are several lessons which government and the private sector can learn from the ongoing Maharlika Investment Fund saga. Number one, ideas, plans, and projects with broad public impact should always be tested before launch. The fate of the nation or the fate of our public cannot be decided in small rooms or in private offices. Our ideas should always be subject to testing, to scrutiny, to consultation with affected sectors and communities. Had high-level officials sought the advice of economic experts, public intellectuals, and affected sectors prior to the announcement of the original MWF, the government would have avoided its first and worst crisis. In their own silos in the palace in Batasan, they probably said, no, it's a go. It sounds good. Or worse, we are doing this because we can. And this is not even about humility in public service, which is obviously important. But this is more about how to make sure that supposedly brilliant, life-changing idea does not blow up in our faces just because we failed to test, we failed to ask questions, we failed to consult. Number two lesson is never second-guess public sentiment. When the original concept was being created, proponents most definitely focused on the grand objectives which can be achieved with a massive investment kitty. This included funding major infrastructure projects such as dams and the national grid. They probably thought that no one, not even economic experts, nor even the typical Filipino family, would object to such lofty objectives for national development. They probably thought that including pension funds into the kitty was justified given the grand objectives of the MIF. This was probably true for high-level officials who never considered pension funds as indispensable to their retirement years. They probably have various instruments and family offices ensuring their retirement and even the sustenance of multiple generations of their families. But this was not true for retiring teachers whose pensions may be obliterated in a single losing investment bet like Temasek. This was not true for retiring factory workers whose already limited SSS pension might get lost with the SSS's foray into the MIF. And to quote the popular social media meme, we are not the same. High-level officials and ordinary families are not the same. In fact, in other major projects, government has been guilty of second-guessing the public. One example, and I think many Filipinos here today would remember, the Manila Bay Dolomite Project. More than 400 million pesos was dumped into this project at the height of the pandemic lockdown. It was touted as part of the Manila Bay rehabilitation push as ordered by the Supreme Court mandamus. But the Supreme Court mandamus and the Manila Bay Rehabilitation Plan never included beach nourishment as part of the necessary projects to improve the water quality in Manila Bay. In fact, in order to improve water quality, what was needed were more sewage treatment plants and other projects with real impact to water quality and sanitation. And on the defensive, the palace then defended the project as necessary for the public's mental health and gaslighted opponents by comparing the trash in Manila Bay during a previous administration. Ultimately, the funding for the project had ceased to date, validating the basis for the public's opposition that it was nothing more but a beautification project and limited funds should have been used somewhere more impactful to the objectives of rehabilitating Manila Bay. And again, because we are all not the same, government should never second guess the public sentiment. Last and number 3, never underestimate the public sentiment. To reiterate, public opposition to the original MIF was swift. Within 24 hours from launch, major sectors of Philippine society, policymakers, opinion makers were up in arms against the MIF. Malacanang and Congress suddenly found themselves in crisis, which they never expected. The typically articulate on various issues was suddenly nowhere to be found. The finance secretary was attacking his peers, calling everyone ignorant. The defense of the MIF was suddenly left to second-level factotums. Curiously, the Senate washed its hands and said then that around December, well, we still don't have a copy of the bill. No one has filed yet in the Senate. But there was radio silence from the president and the speaker. They only spoke a few days after, when the pension funds were already being taken out of the bill, saying that they are open to further discussions to improve the proposal. But the damage has already been done. They were diminished by this flurry of negative public sentiment, with the boldest opponents even raising that this was similar to the various cash grabs in the first Marcos administration. Instead of being able to focus on real achievable gains from the Maharlika Investment Fund, proponents were stymied by the intense public reaction to the MIF funding sources. In fact, because of this intense negative public sentiment, any development or positive changes in the MIF moving forward will now be subject to suspicion and greater scrutiny. It was an avoidable, self-inflicted blunder by both Malacanang and Congress. So to recap, 3 lessons today on transparency and public participation in infrastructure development. Number 1, test before launch. Number 2, not lunch, but launch. Number 2, never second guess public sentiment. Number 3, never underestimate public sentiment. These are lessons which are applicable to both government and corporates. We should avoid making self-inflicted blunders. We should get out of our silos. We should get out of our private offices and spend more time in public spaces, because failing to do so has real consequences. To government and to politicians, it has consequences on their political capital. It has consequences on their prestige. It subjects them to crisis. To corporations, it subjects them to regulatory and political scrutiny. It damages their social capital and impacts their reputation. Worse, it impacts their stock price and their bottom line. So test, Never second guess, never underestimate. Maraming salamat po. Magandang araw.
Thank you very much, Attorney Terry Ridon. Okay, very insightful speech. And again, test before launch, never second guess the public interest or the public sentiment, and never underestimate the public sentiment. Definitely, it's very unfortunate when the representatives of the people do not really represent the interests of the interests of the people, but rather the interests only of a small group of people in power. So at this point, we will now proceed to the open forum portion of our event. We will just do a quick rearranging here in front. So we would like to ask again our speakers, Sir Coco, Attorney Terry, and Ms. Cosette, who is still, I think, with us online. Yeah. Sir Coco, maybe you can join us again in front, Attorney Terry, Sir Coco, and again, to everyone who wants to ask a question, you can just raise your hand, or you can also approach our organizers at the back if you want to ask a question. So you can stay here. Cassette, yes, Ms. Cassette will be on TV. And to our online participants, should you have any questions for our speakers, feel free to send your questions to the Q&A box below on the lower part of your screen. Okay? Sir, you want to? Okay. Question. Okay. All right. Sir, for the first question, since we are talking about the geopolitics, is Ms. Cassette already here? Okay.
I'm here.
Okay, thank you. Also project her video so we can see her. Oh, there. Hello again, Ms. Cassette. We can already see. Can you hear us clearly? Okay. So I guess, as I was saying, my first question is, since we are talking about geopolitics of infrastructure, how do you think can the Philippines capitalize on its bilateral relationships with countries such as the United States in building its infrastructure network despite the increasing tensions in the current geopolitical landscape? Would you like to say something, sir? Sir, Attorney Terry. Ms. Cassette, okay. Tinuturo po kayo ng dalawang gentlemen
Oh,
dito.
yeah, ladies first ba? Anyway, but in For Capital, we've actually partnered with Edge Connects, a US firm, in our data center business. Now, has that anything to do with the geopolitics? I don't know, but I suppose the latest published article that I've read about the U.S. technical assistance being provided to Now Telecoms is a welcome move. Since the U.S. government is involved in that one, then that probably has something to do with the geopolitics. But that's a real a plus, a win for the public, to have potentially another player in the telco.
I think Sir Dindom did mention earlier about the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. Would you like to elaborate on how this can help us in our infrastructure concerns?
I think that's a question for Coco na to answer.
That's the problem when you're staff. When your principal orders you to answer, you're going to answer. I think my own impression of IPEF, and I believe the US government is not far from this impression, is it's still relatively vague what it's all going to be. Of course, infra is on top there, and trade and reliable supply chains, but I think it's all part of a conversation at this point. I think many are looking at it as a potential way of not just getting assistance, but also setting certain standards for all of these items. But I don't think it's developed to the point where we can tell exactly how that will help already. On the geopolitics side, Joyce, and I defer to Dindo and the like on this. So Dindo and company, please correct me. I think the Philippines is obviously very pro-American, and there's lots of Filipinos who are very happy with this shift, this very surprising shift that's happened in our geopolitical position. However, I think as an independent country, it probably behooves us to talk to all sides, and even on the Western side, not to limit ourselves to the U.S., but to talk to the other powers as well, the other countries as well, and get the best we can out of all of these. Of course, there are concerns with certain players in certain countries around the world, but hopefully we have enough of the resources and wherewithal to vet the kinds of assistance we get and make sure it doesn't come with ties that we would not find favorable. So I think, like I said, Philippines very pro-America, pro-US. Lots of people happy with what's happened in the last 6 months or so. But I think it behooves us as a country to really talk to all the different players. There's a lot of talk. I hope this part is not taken by the media. There's a lot of talk that war could come, etc. I think we should do everything we can to delay that. And the more people we're talking to at the same time, we're probably going to delay that or forestall that to make sure that doesn't happen. I'll end there before I lose my job. Terry.
So I'll just speak. I can speak freely. Well, I think the point that needs to be stated today is last week's incident is a significant escalation of tensions in the West Philippine Sea. And it has real impact on the bilateral relations between Beijing and Manila. And it has a real impact on infrastructure plans. So a consequence of warming relations with Washington is most definitely it can include a cooling in terms of infrastructure aid from Beijing. So we have to look at whether or not there is this real impact in that regard. No? That is the first. And secondly, obviously infrastructure is something that can be used as a weapon, diplomatic weapon by the Philippines as well. So those that are not yet ongoing, that are still in the pipeline, can in fact be shelled by government. So I think that is something that we can use as a retaliatory measure for whatever it is that is currently being undertaken within disputed waters today. So I think these are real problems and real consequences that, certainly we hope that bilateral partners will be able to work out. No? At this point, I think the president has spoken that he does not want to escalate it further today. No? Pero I think what he has done is a good first step, summoning the Chinese ambassador, because it speaks also of a boldness to action. We had not seen it in previous times. No? To be fair to the president, he has done it. So if there's further escalation in the West Philippine Sea, I think further action can be undertaken by Manila in this regard.
All right, thank you, Attorney Terry. We also have some guests here in front who wish to add their thoughts on the discussion. We have geopolitics expert here, Dr. Renato De Castro. Would you like to add some more, sir? Oh, but before I give you my mic, we also wish to recognize joining us via Zoom as an observer, I think, is a Presidential Advisor on Investment and Economic Affairs, Secretary Frederick Go. He is with us and listening in our conversation. So, sir, go ahead.
Well, I tend to disagree with when you mentioned pro-American. Not always. In fact, you have previous administration was openly anti-American and pro-Chinese.
I meant the people.
Okay.
Yeah.
But of course, on the basis of this, of course, we remember that the reason why he became very pro-Beijing and anti-American was, of course, of his Build, Build, Build program, which, of course, he linked with China's Belt and Road Initiative. And everyone remembers that in October 2016, President Xi Jinping committed $24 billion, announced, separating from the US, here I come, and as a reward, of course, President Xi Jinping committed $24 billion. Of course, this was in 2016. But what, if you're looking at 6 years later, the major infrastructure projects are not from China. They're from Japan. The major, of course, is the subway system. So what does this tell us about the geopolitics of infrastructure here in the Philippines and in the region?
You're supposed to answer.
Mike has asked a question.
Go ahead.
I was going to ask Terry. I mean, when Terry was talking about infra, how much of that aid from China supposedly arrived? And I gather it's a very small amount, if anything. So I guess the point I was trying to make is we already know that history and that phenomenon, but it doesn't hurt us and probably serves our purpose to keep the lines open. And I take Terry's point that it's very good. Frankly expected, except because we haven't expected it in a long time, for the government to protect our sovereignty and to take a stand where our sovereignty is compromised. So
Would you like to add some more, Ms. Cassette?
No, that was a good point that was raised, at the beginning of last administration's reign. They were kind of touting, aids from China, but that never happened. We still saw the proponents of ODA, primarily Japan, that was really actively involved in infra. But what we're seeing now is kind of a more active role that the U.S. is playing, because of the presence of I guess China companies here in the country, and I think that's to our advantage. I think as a people, right? So more involvement from both sides. So I agree with Coco, talking to everyone, and seeing what can be secured from both, to further the development of our infra. Is always a win for the Filipino people.
Ambassador, would you like to ask a question or to add on to the discussion? Okay, so we have Ambassador Jaime Bautista.
Yes, good morning, thank you. What I got from the first speaker was that with respect to our policy on transport, our policy should be holistic. And from Mr. Alquas, what I obtained from you was that we should also address the problem of getting around the country. So my question is, what should be the preference of the Philippines? Should it be roads or railways? That's my first question. I wish to note that according to Clark Development Corporation, China has agreed to fund the transport link between Clark Air Base and Metro Manila, correct? So my second question is, will global politics interfere in our decision on whether railways or roads? I wish to also state that because mention was made about the military laser attack on our Philippine Coast Guard, Marie Pascua. Boy, the name is bad, Marie Pascua. And of course, this was very aggressive. It was an unfriendly act on the part of China because the waters around Ayusin Shoal and around Mischief Reef are not disputed waters. They are part of our EEZ and part of our continental shelf because Ayusin Shoal and Mischief Reef are totally submerged at high tide. So I just wish to state that I represent the Philippine Council for Foreign Relations. And every year we have a roundtable with CPIFA, the Chinese People's Institute for Foreign Affairs. And our role will be to see if we can promote confidence-building measures with China. On the issue of Indo-Pacific, I just want to state that the ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific is economic inclusiveness, to include everyone for the economic development of the region. Yes. Thank you.
Answer the question. First question, roads or railways?
I hope I'm very clear on that. I think if we're not mistaken, that it's currently overweight on roads, and we would like to see it overweight on public transport. Public transport for us means rails and well-organized buses. A lot of the service contracting should come in. There is a kind of a hybrid system now going on in EDSA. That should be, if possible, made a full service contracting system ASAP. To be frank, I don't know why that can't be done with a stroke of a pen by next week. And when I said a while ago or earlier on that I consider this a sin, it's because of that. All of these other problems that we're talking about will take years to address. But with a stroke of a pen, the president or the Secretary of Transportation or some other government officials can change the bus system in this country. I'm very disappointed that when President Duterte had emergency powers, he didn't do that. I've heard president after president talk about fixing the bus system in this country. You had a strong woman like Gloria Arroyo talking about it. She couldn't fix it. You had a Democrat like President Aquino talking about it. He couldn't fix it. You had a president like President Duterte who acts like a dictator, and for a while we gave dictatorial powers to, and he couldn't fix it. This is the sin. Every day people spend hours in that kind of traffic. They don't need to. Every day that goes on is a sin on the leadership of this country, and maybe on us.
Ambassador, are you okay? There's another mic. Yes.
Yes, I'd just like to make two more points. On the issue of transport being holistic, I think we should also look at our maritime transport system. And this is linked, to our history. The fact that we had the galleon trade, we had the shipbuilding industry, and I think we should give emphasis now to shipbuilding. We should give emphasis now to shipbuilding. The Indonesians are now talking of Indonesia being the hub, the maritime hub of the region. But the Philippines was the first country to espouse the archipelagic principle. We have a 200-mile EEZ and continental shelf on both east and west of the Philippines. We have some of the largest coastlines. We are actually the center of biodiversity in marine species. We are at the center of the archipelagic continent. So we should look at shipbuilding as our stairway to industrialization, or our stairway to agri-industrialization. So, and then I would like to ask Mr. Alquas, because we've been talking about electric buses, etc., and I suppose we can also talk about electric boats. And the Philippines and Indonesia are the top nickel exporters. No? Shouldn't we ask the EU and the United States, on the issue of batteries? No? The Philippines should be a center for making batteries, rather than us exporting our nickel. The same way, Philippines exporting mines when we should be building our sawmills in Batangas and in Ligan, etc., etc. So, thank you.
Would you like to answer that, sir? Or
Ask Cosette first if she is.
Ms. Cassette, did you hear the question
Yeah, I
about
knew,
the nickel?
I knew Coco would pass it on to. But yeah, actually, in terms of battery manufacturing, that's being explored by, I think, well, by our affiliate, Avoids Power, and I suppose other companies as well. So that's happening, Ambassador. So.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Cassette. We have, yeah. Okay.
I'm not sure what we should ask the EU or other countries. Indonesia did it on its own. I think many people in this room will know that I believe 5 or 6 years ago, Indonesia said, or maybe 4 years ago, said we're not allowing exports anymore. And so if you want to use our nickel, you build your factory here. Now, obviously they're in a great position because they're number one. I don't know nickel markets that well. I don't know if we had done something similar, if we could have gotten a head start as well. It's a lot of these decisions need to be made by Filipinos, and we haven't been making them. I'm not sure we can turn to other countries to make these decisions for us. So hopefully this government thinks about that and does something, whether it's on EVs or other policies, policies that will create jobs and industries in this country rather than continuing to export nickel, people, and not agriculture because we don't have that.
All right, but sir, we'll have to give chance to others first, if that's okay. Okay, one sentence, sir. Okay. Okay, so may we recognize Mr. Eric Lachica, please.
Morning. My name is Eric Lachica. I represent the U.S. Filipinos for Good Governance based in Washington, D.C. Two-part questions. I know that Dindo mentioned the interesting words, non-traditional national security risks. What's that? And number two, to Terry, if China escalates from lasers to some more damaging actions, what would you recommend to the President, Marcos Jr.?
Well, also directed to our very progressive.
Yes.
Well, you mentioned beyond. I think Justice Parker mentioned the need to strengthen the alliance. To the point that he mentioned the mutual defense treaty. What is your view regarding relying on our only treaty ally, the United States, in terms of addressing this issue?
These are difficult questions, huh? You have to go to lunch.
That's really intended.
And just to remind everyone, our guests are from the business sector and the public policy sector. So I think Dr. De Castro is actually the more apt person to ask about national security and geopolitics at this point. But should you, yes,
Well,
would you
I think
like to answer still?
for the first question, what is an escalation? I think more than a laser, military grade laser, that would be probably bumping into the ships already, right? That would be like a micro escalation from the lasers, and then probably open conflict. No? In these areas, there are real treaty allies, no, between Washington and Manila. I think the president should really be forced to take on Washington on their commitment on their supposedly ironclad commitment to defend the Philippines in the event of an armed attack. No? So I think that should be one of the tools of the Philippines in terms of a worsening conflict in disputed waters. No? So yeah, that is my response.
I'm trying to check what the title of today's conversation. It was infrastructure, right? Why are we talking about war?
Of infrastructure, sir. Okay. All right. Okay, let's go back to infrastructure now. So I think you guys discussed earlier at the PPP and Build project of the previous administration. what do you think are the lessons that learned from the previous administration in terms of infrastructure building that the Build Better More can adopt?
I think that's gonna
Are
be
there
passed on to
okay,
me.
Ms. Cassette, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so I guess they're doing the right things by engaging the private sector in developing these projects. But what they can do better is actually to move faster. Aside from but they have to move faster. The only difference, for example, that right now versus when I was with government is that the rules are there. The private sector knows about the PPP. It's now more of government allowing the private sector to collaborate more with them in building or implementing these projects faster. I noticed in the Q&A question, Sec Babes, the former DPWH secretary, posted there that the PPP, not privatization, PPP projects for MRT, MRT3 O&M, LRT2 O&M should be done now. Those are low-hanging fruits that the government should be focusing on, and that will certainly alleviate, the misery of the passengers, the commuters. It's a crime, to see commuters lining, several layers of queues. And that's something that the government can actually act on a bit faster.
Kaho? Sorry, lessons learned from the build that the Build Better More can also learn from, or can also implement this.
I think I'll probably echo a bit of what Cosette said. Definitely speed. It is it is a very pleasant surprise that when this government came in, they said that they would address two things relatively quickly. We didn't believe they could do it that quickly, but they did. One was revising the revision of the BOT IRR, and the second one was fixing the BPO work from home issue. They did those both within months, much to our surprise, pleasant surprise. Hopefully they can attack PPPs with the same dispatch. And as Cosette said, there are low-hanging fruit there. I understand there are projects that were approved by NEDA 6 years ago, and I suspect you can kind of dust them off. And I think the DOTR is doing that with some of these airports, for example. But there must be some more of that they can quickly put in place. I'll only add that Cosette called it a crime. I call it a sin. So you're either a criminal or a sinner if you're not cooperating with this. Choose your poison, I guess.
Attorney Terry, would you like to add some more?
Well, I think one of the main complaints of the private sector and investors has always been the number of permits, that is being required from proponents of all of these projects. The previous president has been able to reduce the number of permits. To be fair to President Duterte, in relation to the tower liberalization, they've been able to do it. I think the new president should be able to do it in other infrastructure sectors as well. That is first reducing the number of permits, but secondly, what we have not been very successful on is reducing corruption in every step of the way, from the first step up until operation of all of these projects at all levels of government, at the national level, at the local level. There is still illicit corrupt activities undertaken by government officials. So I think at the highest level, the president should clearly make a policy statement relating to this. So para matakot yung mga tao tungkol sa usapin po na ito.
And considering the amount of money involved in infrastructure development, just a follow-up question on that, how can we ensure that funds are appropriated and used properly?
Well, I think, for example, for the private sector, every peso counts, every investor peso or dollar counts, no? So I think there's no question that they would have a fiduciary responsibility relating to all of this money. It's really a question of what government will seek to do with all of these projects in front of them. It has always been the case in which every city where there is a project, a city mayor, a city councilor, a city council, a national congress, no? For those that are requiring franchises, are seeking to get favors from the private sector. This is something that needs a top-level policy statement from the president himself. I don't think President Duterte has been able to deliver such a message. The President Marcos should be able to do so today moving forward.
And I'm sure you, coming from the private sector, you've been experiencing these problems that Attorney Terry said. How would you assess, my question is, how would you assess the actions, or at least the statements, perhaps, of the current administration insofar as addressing these problems are concerned? Are you satisfied with how the current administration is handling these problems insofar as red tape, ease of doing business is concerned?
The statements have been good. The statements have been good since his election, since inauguration, since SONA and the like. The statements are all on point. I think really it's now time to concretize those. For one, I would say, make a declaration that we know what the past behavior was like when it came, the past government behavior was like when it came to infra and PPPs. We're going to put a stop to that, and we're going to respect contracts from now on. In terms of corruption, I think the great thing about PPPs, and Cosette, I'll turn over to Cosette after this. The great thing about PPPs is, for the most part, after it's bid out, the government doesn't need to worry about corruption. If the participants in the PPP want to self-deal among themselves, that's their problem. That's bad too, but that's their problem. But once, if the bidding out is done fairly and above board, then the government doesn't need to worry about corruption anymore. I don't know if that's a correct interpretation, Cosette.
Ms. Cosette?
Yeah, that's true, Coco. Corruption is radically mitigated if done via PPPs. But to comment, to add to Terry and Coco's point, I guess the president has been saying the right things thus far in terms of expediting projects. No, another crime, not crime really, but yes, it is. But another issue is, the delaying tactics of the various levels in government should be, should be addressed via, like what Coco mentioned a while ago, some sort of a statement that let's move faster, let's decide faster, and evaluate faster. Not just from the national level, but also in GOCCs, in LGUs. I guess that should be a recurring theme. A recurring reminder should be issued by the president, as I guess to the various government agencies.
All right. Perhaps just to wrap up the discussion, and as my last question as well, we've been talking about how the public can benefit from all, or how the public interest should be prioritized in the infrastructure development. How do you think can the public, in turn, participate in the country's infrastructure development? What can they do to help?
The people.
Yes, Ms. Cassette. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, everyone has been given 5-minute fame, right, via the social media, right? So I guess the social media should be used well, barring, the how it can be manipulated, right? The social media should be properly used to get information from the users, from the commuters, from the public.
Attorney, thank
And
you.
actually, that's a really good, in PPP projects, there's a monitoring phase, monitoring of service level agreements between the private proponent and the government, right? Feedback from the users, from the public, is seriously taken into account by the private sector. We do that, in most of our projects with the government.
All right, Attorney Terry.
Well, the public should be able to engage at every step of the project. No? So I think in every forum or consultation, the public should be there. Well, they should attend, and they should be invited by government and by the private sector for them to be able to articulate their ideas relating to rates, relating to even maybe the design, no, of the proposals. No? Kasi, syempre, hello? Ultimately, there's no sound. Ultimately, it is not just government or the private sector that is involved. A big chunk of projects involve the public themselves. No, there is a real public impact if we fail in creating or implementing good projects. No, so I think at every step of the way, the public should be involved.
And as you said, never underestimate public sentiment. Sir Coco?
Maybe I'll turn it on its head. Obviously, the public's interested in this, but you know, they're spending 3 or 4 hours a day in traffic. They don't have time and energy to do this. What surprises me is that no politician has made transport his or her big issue. Take Metro Manila. If a politician or a president or a transport secretary, or I don't know if MMDA has much power in this area, made this their battle cry and their mission, imagine the kind of votes he would get the next time he ran. I don't understand why that's not happening. I would love a populist of that flavor to make, if someone like that made transportation or solving the Metro Manila traffic problem. I gather cities like Cebu have problems, similar problems already. Making that their battle cry, making that their mission, and benefiting from that politically by bringing the people with them, the people who can't lead this because they're too busy stuck waiting for their trains or their buses, but who will, I think, really follow somebody who makes it his battle cry or her mission.
We'll wait for that in the next elections. And on that note, we would like to thank everyone. We would like to thank Ms. Cosette Cadilao, Mr. Coco Alcoaz, and Attorney Terry Ridon for joining us today. And yes, Ms. Cosette.
Can I say one last
Yes,
thing?
go ahead.
I think in all dealings between the private sector and the government, the level of trust should improve. We all want the same thing. Ultimately, we all want to improve connectivity. We all want to improve mobility, and we want the country and the people, to enhance the service, the level of living of our fellow Filipinos. So the level of trust between the private and the public sector should also improve, and we should take that into account when we deal with one another.
All right. Thank you very much, Ms. Cassette, Sir Coco Alcoaz, and Attorney Terry Ridon. And thank you also to everyone who joined us here in person in our venue, and to everyone who joined us via Zoom. And we hope you can join us again in our next event. Our next will be this Thursday, the Philippine Circular Economy Agenda, integrating sustainable and strategic waste management systems. That's at 9 a.m. at the Macario Sakay Quezon City Sports Club. And we have another one on March 3, strengthening partnerships for the open Indo-Pacific. I think you said that again, sir. All right, this is on March 3, 9 a.m. at the Manila Golf and Country Club. So we hope to see you all there again next week. Again, both events are accessible via as well. So thank you for a very interesting, insightful discussion today, and have a good rest of the day, everyone.